So coming into this space this year, I don't know about everybody else, but I'm feeling like we're in a particularly challenging political moment right now. It just feels like we're all so fucking fucked right now. And communities that have been so screwed forever are continuing to experience that. The number of people who are in that group is growing every day. And I think one of the ways that power functions in these moments and that institutions of power function is by creating clashes between us, between different communities. And it's something that can happen in spaces like this where we are talking about specific identities and specific identity issues. So I'm really hoping that we together as a group at this conference can be visioning ways forward where we can support each other and move forward each other as a community, as a really broad intersectional movement to sort of change this and fight against the institutions of power that are hurting all of us. So I've been coming to the CLPP conference. This is my 5th year now. As I said, I was an organizer of the conference. During this time, I've seen an increased addressing of trans issues and issues of gender nonconforming folks within this space. I started out speaking on the masculinities panel a couple times. Last year I transitioned over to Feminine-tastic, which was really exciting for me. This is my 3rd time on the Transfeminism panel. And during this time, there's been a lot of Trans 101 work going on within the space of this conference, increasingly within the space of the reproductive justice movement. I think this conference has really been pushing that. And I think that's really important, that we need to be addressing language, we need to be addressing basic understandings, we need to really keep doing that work. But I'm really feeling like we need to be moving into the next step of focusing on trans issues as reproductive justice issues, and not just talking about trans issues as reproductive justice issues, but really making that part of our reproductive justice work. Doing the deliberate work to include trans people in reproductive justice work, especially trans women and especially trans women of color, and I'll be addressing that a little bit. Many of the issues that we face, that trans folks face, are reproductive justice issues and really do fit squarely within the framework. Tone started to talk about that a little bit. There is no way I can comprehensively talk about everything, but I do want to pull out a few different things. Identity documents, which are incredibly important for access to employment, access to healthcare, access to so many things. There are very often requirements, either real and on the books or assumed, that you need to have the surgery to get your gender changed on identity documents. There is no the surgery, but what these government institutions are thinking about is sexual reassignment surgery, genital surgery, which is incredibly expensive, very difficult to access, not what every trans person wants, which is really important. And further, especially for trans women, very often means sterilization. This to me is an issue of eugenics, of making it impossible for us to reproduce. It's a reproductive justice issue. So there's a case right now in New York State, cases like this are popping up all the time, where they're trying to change the law for people to be able to change their identity on their birth certificates without proving that they've had the surgery. To me, this is a reproductive justice issue. Lack of trans inclusion in healthcare. It can be incredibly difficult to access healthcare that isn't trans inclusive. Within the abortion rights community, we talk all the time, especially in these sort of more radical spaces, about the explicit exclusion of abortion from government-run healthcare, from federal healthcare. That's really important. Trans healthcare is explicitly or implicitly excluded from healthcare all over the place. This is a reproductive justice issue. We face really high employment discrimination, which is very much connected to these two previous issues. And again, healthcare and employment are so tied together in this country that it becomes an issue of reproductive justice. That's why something like the Employment Non-Discrimination Act is an issue that should be something the reproductive justice community is working on. because of the high employment discrimination, so many trans folks end up doing sex work. And I want to be really explicit that sex work should be able to be an honorable, safe, good thing. And it also shouldn't be the only option. And we need to be able to hold both of those, hold the reality of making sex work safe and possible for people to do, and not criminalized, and creating other options for trans folks. Trans folks are incarcerated at incredibly high numbers, especially trans people of color, especially trans women of color. This is connected to the criminalization of sex work, to not having access to employment and to public spaces. And trans folks are put in the wrong gender facilities almost universally, which is incredibly dangerous. The Sylvia Rivera Law Project, I'm sure if anyone's in the room right now, they do amazing, amazing work working with a lot of trans folks who are incarcerated, and they've really opened my eyes to thinking about prisons as a site of modern day eugenics, that the interest of the prisons is to prevent pregnancy, not to prevent sexual violence, not to prevent rape, and that this has a lot to do with where trans folks are placed. And so therefore, again, it's an issue of eugenics, of not being able to have families, not being able to have children. So we need to be working to change the policies and the practices of these institutions at the same time that we're working to decriminalize transgender bodies, and at the same time that we're working to dismantle the prison industrial complex. These are just like a small sampling of a few issues. I'm sure we'll talk about a lot more. And we are a small minority group, and we have very little power in this country, in this world right now. We face overwhelming oppression, overwhelming exclusion and violence, and we need allies who are active and working on these issues with us. So I want to talk a little bit about what you can do to join us. And the first thing is educating yourself, and being here is really great for that. I'm really happy to see you all. Reading, accessing what you can. Go online if you have access to the internet, and look up Little Light's essay, The Seam of Skin and Scales, and read it 10 times in a row, so you start to get the slightest feeling for why so many trans women hold it up as their manifesta. Julia Serrano's book. There's an increasing number of trans folks using the blogosphere as a way to express ourselves. I'm at Feministing, Autumn Sandine, at Pam's House Blend, the blog Questioning Transphobia, Trans G Riot, Tony Diorsi and Jillian Weiss at Valerico, and you'll find a real diversity of opinion online. We like to disagree a lot, and that's awesome. And then, what can you do practically? Finding the local trans and gender nonconforming groups in your community and seeing what they need. If you have money that you can give and they need money, giving money. If you have skills and time that you can give, and that's what they need, giving that. Volunteering, donating resources, seeing what their needs are. Work in collaboration with your local trans organizations and groups, and let them take the lead. Let them be the people at the center, creating the agenda and saying how it's going to be moved forward. If you're professionalized in the movement, hire trans folks, especially trans women. There is a really real issue in the reproductive justice field of some trans men getting this sort of false acceptance within our organizations because they get seen as butch lesbians, and that's incredibly fucked up, and that really needs to change. And there's a real sort of lack of acceptance of trans women, and especially trans women of color. Simply being trans and out really sort of delegitimizes us to so many people in so many ways, and yet my whiteness is a form of legitimacy to so many people. So thinking about what you consider qualifications, what you consider a legitimate reason for someone to be in your workspace, and a legitimate skill set, a legitimate value in a workplace. It's really important to remember that it's not okay to just hire a trans person and think you've done the work. I worked in a reproductive justice organization that didn't have trans inclusive healthcare. That's not okay. My presence was also seen as sort of doing the work on trans issues, sort of implicitly, just by me being there. That's not okay. You really need to do the work to make sure it's a space that trans folks, trans women of color can be in and working in, have that be a positive and good experience for them. Because if we're going to be working for justice, we need some form of justice in our own lives. Really, really strongly believe that. And I want to make a reminder that I'm here asking for your help. I'm saying we need allies, but there is a massive diversity in the trans community. Trans women are just as diverse as the group women. We are also part of the group women, by the way. So there are folks who might not want you as their ally, might not want to be working with you, and recognize that you don't have an entitlement to our issues, and that that's a complicated place to be in. I want to make talk about the example really quickly of Equality Maryland, which is a gay rights organization in Maryland. They just lost a public fight for same-sex marriage in the state. I think largely as a result of ignoring the calls from the queer people of color community in the state that they needed to be figuring out how to talk to queer people of color, that they needed to be working with the Black church. And so after losing that fight, they started pushing a Gender Non-Discrimination Act that doesn't include public accommodations as one of the places of non-discrimination. It's faced really massive opposition from trans folks in the state, especially trans women of color, and they have been consistently kept out of the spaces where it's been discussed. And this opposition has been ignored so that this gay rights organization can try to put a win on their books. That's not okay. That's not being an ally. That's not how you work on our issues. We need to direct our energy and our resources to making it possible for us to be leading our own work, for trans folks to be leading the work for trans justice. We need to keep doing the Trans 101, keep learning, and we need to always be centering trans issues within the reproductive justice framework, not just as a conceptual thing, not just as a conversation that we have in this space where we get to have these really cool conceptual conversations, but as something that we're living